Female hormonal health, fertility, and menopause are absolutely crucial talking points, yet still we lack so much information and focus on them. Whether you are a female or not, this video will be insightful. We women must understand what is happening in our bodies at a cellular level once we hit menopause and how we can already in our early years start preparing for it, while maximizing our fertility and hormonal health to avoid rapid aging after menopause. However, people around us should also be aware of this because roughly half of the population will go through menopause. To bring you the scientific background to this critical topic, I had the pleasure of bringing Dr. Nichola Conlon, founder and CEO of Nuchido Laboratories, molecular biologist and cellular aging expert, back to our channel to discuss the topic of why menopause is linked to rapid aging and what we can do about it. Welcome, Nichola. It's so great to have you here again with us, and thank you so much for taking your time to talk today with us about the menopause and the aging process for women, of course. So happy to have you here.
Thank you so much for inviting me back.
For sure. So maybe we can just jump directly into the topic. So Nichola, could you just give our viewers an overview about why and how menopause has a significant impact on us females regarding our aging process?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, just menopause in itself is a key part of the aging process in women. The average age for the onset of menopause is 51 years old, menopause being defined when you haven't had a period for a whole year. And when you think about the symptoms of menopause, I mean, there are many, many symptoms, depending on, which sort of statistic you look at. Some people say there's over 50, some people say there's around 48, but generally there are a lot of different symptoms. And, when you look at some of the symptoms, some of them are very similar to the kinds of symptoms that we just generally would associate with aging. So things like a lack of energy, cognitive decline, brain fog, not feeling as sharp as we used to, not having the stamina that we used to, skin quality declining, hair thinning. A lot of these things are, classified as menopause symptoms, but also when you look at them, they're also very similar to just general symptoms of aging. And when you speak to many women who are going through perimenopause, the period before menopause, and also menopause, one thing that they will tell you is, aside from all the specific symptoms, what they feel like is generally that they have just aged very rapidly. Like they've just hit menopause and all of a sudden they feel like they have aged like 10 years. And this is a really common feedback that you will get from a lot of women at this stage. They can't put an exact finger on what it is, but they will just say in general, they just feel terrible, feel like they've suddenly got very, very old, and they really do not know what's happened. So, this has led scientists to do quite a bit of research into what is the link between menopause and aging. And there was a really interesting study that came out, which was measuring something called biological age. So our biological age is our age that we are, or the rate at which we are aging on the inside at the cellular level, as opposed to our chronological age, which is simply the age according to our birth certificate. And the interesting thing about these two ages is they don't always marry up. So you can have a different biological age to what your chronological age is. So generally, if your biological age is higher than your chronological age, that's not what you would want because it shows you're aging faster than you should be. On the flip side, if it was lower, it's better because you're aging slower than you typically should be. Now, the reason I'm saying this is because in this particular study, they actually measured biological age of women that were going between a 6-month period where they were transitioning from perimenopause into full menopause. And they found that during this 6 months, the average age of a woman increased by 9 years. That's their biological age.
Wow.
in just 6 months. So actually, there is some science now to prove that the menopause is actually making women age quite rapidly, and that was the average. In some of the women, they experienced up to 20 years of additional biological age added on, which is just, crazy to think that that could happen so quickly. But it shows how much of an influence our hormones have on our aging as women.
Don't miss this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. On August 22nd, Beyond Sapiens will take you on a transformative, all-inclusive healthcation to Chennai, India. Join a community of top entrepreneurs and successful professionals worldwide at a multi-award-winning 5-star luxury hotel. You will receive more than 35 different health screenings, therapies, and holistic services, including your biological age, 181 biomarkers, full body MRI and DEXA scans, VO2 max testing, and various spa-like services. We host this event in partnership with IBO, one of the world's most advanced health and biohacking centers. So visit beyondsapiens.co for more details and reserve your spot today before it's sold out. I think in general this is just shocking, because I think it's wonderful that we now have the science to back it up, but also that we are not really being taught any of this in school, for example. But maybe we can dive a little bit deeper into what is actually happening then on a cellular level when you hit menopause or just before. So I will leave that for you.
Yeah, and I think this is an important conversation to have, because it's great that we're now talking a lot more about menopause. Certainly when I was at school, it was definitely something that wasn't mentioned, and I think still probably not mentioned like it should be. And the conversation surrounding menopause in general has opened up. A lot more people are talking about it, but we're still very much focused on the fact that menopause is a thing, and there are these symptoms. But what's really not understood or spoken about a lot is, why do we get these symptoms? Because it can often be quite confusing to women that, they know that it's because their hormones are declining. And we've always been taught that these hormones are involved in fertility. There are sex hormones. So why on earth does the decline of those hormones lead to us forgetting people's names or waking up in the middle of the night sweating? Like, it doesn't make sense if they're just fertility hormones. So this can be quite confusing, and it can be one of the reasons that a lot of women actually fail to recognize that they're in perimenopause or even menopause, because they're just like, well, why would that symptom be anything to do with my hormones? But actually, a lot of the symptoms are not to do with our fertility. And this is because our hormones actually regulate a lot more than just fertility. Look at estrogen, for example. If you were to look at a lot of the cells throughout your body, not just in in terms of your ovaries and things like that, but everywhere, your brain, your muscles, everything, they actually have a lot of estrogen receptors. So a receptor on a cell is basically like a switch. And what happens is, when the estrogen binds to its receptor, it switches on this switch, and that will activate lots of different pathways within our cells, which make our cells, behave in a certain way. So all of a sudden, when you hit menopause, this estrogen isn't there to activate all these switches, and they remain off. And then the body's like, why am I not getting this signal that I usually am? And why are all these pathways being altered? And this is why we get such a vast array of symptoms across the whole body. And if you think about specifically some of the symptoms, let's take probably one of the most common, which is a lack of energy, feeling really drained and tired all the time. And what we see is that the energy powerhouses in our cells, these are called the mitochondria, which basically take all our food and turn it into all of the energy that our cells need to function. They are covered in estrogen receptors. So all of a sudden, estrogen goes down, and it means that you just don't have the estrogen switch on these receptors on your mitochondria, and your cells simply can't produce the same amount of energy from the same amount of food that you've always eaten. They just don't work as well. So we see this in a reduction of energy and stamina, physical fatigue. But not only that, we also see an issue in terms of mental fatigue. And this is where probably the second most biggest complaint or symptom comes in, which is brain fog. Some women will literally question themselves, like, have I got Alzheimer's? Have I got dementia? Because what has happened to my brain? I literally can't think. I can't remember things. I go into the shops. I don't know what I've went in for. It's really scary. But again, your brain needs a lot of energy. It needs a lot of power. It has lots of mitochondria. It's estimated that you've got 86 million neurons in your brain, and each neuron has 2 million mitochondria. And each of them has, I don't know how many estrogen receptors. So all of a sudden, there's a lot of estrogen receptors that are not getting their estrogen. And some experiments have demonstrated that this can reduce a woman's brain power by up to 25%. So that's like wiping out a quarter of our brain function. So it's pretty crazy when you think about it.
Yes, 100%. And I think this is like you're getting to the root cause of it. Like people can be really surprised by these symptoms and they don't connect it to like what is actually happening because they don't know what's happening within. So as you said, super important discussion.
Yeah. And I think, when you look at the biological age, a lot of people say, well, why do the hormones have such an impact on increasing biological age? So, fundamentally aging us at the cellular level. And again, this is all coming back to the role of estrogen in particular, and also a bit of progesterone. But these hormones are very important for regulating inflammation across a woman's body or regulating our immune systems. And what seems to happen is that when we have a lot of estrogen, it basically keeps our immune system under control. It dampens it down a bit. It's very good that we want an immune response when it's appropriate. If we've got an infection or we've cut ourselves and we need an immune response. But unfortunately, what seems to happen as we get older is that we become chronically inflamed. So we have this low level of inflammation that just seems to be switched on all of the time in our bodies. And this is actually incredibly damaging. In fact, within the longevity space, we often call it inflammaging because it's such a huge driver of the aging process. So you hit menopause, estrogen goes down, inflammation goes up. This is damaging to our cells, and this is what actually increases biological age.
Yeah, that was very well compressed, the whole topic. And I think especially for women, like you mentioned, like the cognitive decline or like the cognitive dysfunction of this brain fog. And we have, of course, many women, like whatever you're working with, but especially women in high positions in business world, like this can really be a huge thing on your work performance, but also on your like career in general and your identity when you hit these changes. And as we know, of course, we can do things about these things, and that's why we're also discussing today to understand how can we understand this better, but also what can we do to optimize for this, what can we do to make it easier for women to actually go through this. So maybe we can a little bit transition the discussion towards this of what it actually is that we can do to address the actual symptoms once we are in menopause, and then later on we can talk also what you can do earlier. But yes, that would be my next question.
Yeah, that's such an important point to highlight, in particularly in, menopause massively can impact a woman's life. Some people are very lucky and, they can sail through it with not many symptoms. But for other women, it can have a huge impact. And, this isn't just on home life, but as well as you mentioned, trying to work, especially if you are a woman in a career that is very demanding, that has a lot of responsibility. And then all of a sudden, your brain's just not working. This is really tricky. And another symptom is a lot of anxiety. Very confident women can all of a sudden become crippled with anxiety that they've never experienced before. So I think it's really important to have the education and the understanding surrounding the fact that this is a problem, and this is something that you can't control. Your hormones have just gone crazy, and it really is a thing. But yeah, how do we address these symptoms? And is there a way we can kind of really help to reduce the effects? And I think you can't really talk about menopause without talking about hormone replacement therapy. And, if this is something that has had a lot of bad press over the years due to studies that were linking it with cancer. We now know that those studies were severely flawed, and actually the benefits of hormone replacement therapy far outweigh any risks. And if there was one thing that did improve that study where we were looking at biological age, it was hormone replacement therapy. It was the one thing that was able to massively reverse biological aging. And that's because, menopause is essentially a hormone deficiency. You've become deficient in these hormones. If you replace them, the problem goes away. Now, we know that HRT is not for everyone, and that some people, would prefer not to go on it or simply can't go on it. So what are the kind of other ways that you can possibly try to help? And I think a key thing is actually looking at just improving your cellular health in general. We know the impact that these hormones are having is at a cellular level. And when it comes to aging, we know that absolutely everything to do with aging, even if that's something we see on the outside or a way we feel, all starts at the cellular level. So anything you can actually do to improve cellular health is always a very good way to start. And one exciting tool that's come about that seems to really help with cellular aging surrounds a molecule called NAD. Which is short for nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide, which is a bit of a mouthful, which is why it's abbreviated to NAD or NAD+. So this molecule is something that I've studied for a long time in relation to aging, not in relation to menopause originally. And NAD is known to be a natural molecule found in all cells in your body. It is very important for many different cellular processes, but most famous for two. One is energy production in your mitochondria, which we've just discussed, and the second is for cellular repair. And as a general rule of thumb, if you have lots of NAD, you will have lots of cellular repair and lots of energy production. But if NAD goes down, you will have low energy and low repair. Now, it's been found that just like our hormones, NAD also declines with age. And it's important to point out that this isn't just in women, this is actually in men and women. We both experience NAD decline. Now, the issue is when NAD goes down, it means our mitochondria don't work as well to produce energy, and also we get a lot of damage in our cells, which ultimately increases our biological age and accelerates the aging process. So in women, we have this double issue, which is right as our NAD levels are really declining, our estrogen, our hormone levels are really declining. And both of these things are actually acting on pretty similar pathways in the cells. The mitochondria are the key ones that I've just mentioned. We know that NAD is absolutely critical for mitochondrial function. So when NAD goes down, our mitochondria don't work as well. Estrogen is also important, as we've learned, for mitochondrial function. So that is also going down. So when you put the two together in women, you've suddenly got this perfect storm where, oh my goodness, we've gone from having healthy mitochondria that were producing all this energy to all of a sudden having dysfunctional mitochondria that literally cannot keep up with the demands of the body. So if you can do something about NAD, for example, then at least you can kind of fix half the issue. You can increase NAD, which means that you're helping mitochondrial function. If you combine that with things like HRT that are actually also working from the hormone end, then you're going to get double the benefits. But even doing half of it and restoring NAD does have a huge benefit to menopausal symptoms, particularly things like energy and brain fog, which is how I initially got into it all, because we had so many sort of customers reporting that boosting NAD was something that was massively helping with their symptoms.
Yes, and I actually wanted to ask also about that, and I love how you put this in this concept of like people to really understand that it's this double effect of the estrogen but also the NAD. So I really love that. But maybe about the feedback, maybe there is something that could be beneficial for our viewers to hear, like some specific example or story that your customers that have used Nuchido Time Plus have experienced regarding their symptoms. Maybe you can share something about that.
Yeah, the number one reported benefit is brain fog. And we get so many emails and just customer messages completely spontaneously of women saying, oh my goodness, I did not realize. I mean, I knew I had brain fog, but I did not realize how bad it was until it wasn't there anymore. And a lot of women saying, in particularly one testimonial always springs to mind of a particular lady who is a runs a really successful company, said that, she'd basically gone from being a tired old bag, her words, not mine, to, suddenly being superhuman again and on fire, and like had literally been able to, turn her business around. And it had made such an impact because she could just think again. She could think clearly, and how much of a difference that it had actually made to her. So, for us, knowing that something as simple as a dietary supplement, not a drug, not a hormone, can actually have such an impact. And I think another important thing to mention is we know a lot of women who are going through menopause really suffer with sleep issues. Whether this is due to waking up in the middle of the night with sweats, or just generally not being able to sleep like they used to. NAD is also known to be very important in regulating our circadian rhythm. So our circadian rhythm is our 24-hour sleep-wake cycle. It sort of goes up and down, controls hormones throughout the day, controls melatonin, things like that, and helps us to get to sleep, stay asleep, and be awake at the right times. As NAD goes down, it means that basically you don't have a strong influence regulating your circadian rhythm. So sleep starts to become dysfunctional. So again, we've recently done a clinical study to demonstrate that it can actually help with sleep as well.
Wonderful. Yeah, that's really so powerful, and also so powerful the stories that you have received. I think it's awesome that you have created this supplement with so much passion and vision, and that it's also helping for female health. I think that's super wonderful. We have a 20% discount for you to encourage you to take charge of your cellular and hormonal health. Our trusted partner, Nuchido, has a one-of-a-kind, science-based and highly effective supplement you can now test for yourself using our code BeyondSapiens20 for 20% off. You can find the supplement up here or in the description. So maybe moving on to the next part where I was thinking about the overall effects. I know you have already touched upon those and we have discussed that, but maybe if we think about like earlier on for females, like before you are in menopause, because like many females want to nowadays also focus on their career. They want to prolong kind of like their time before they start the family, before they want to have their kids. And of course, here the fertility part becomes very important. So I would love to hear your thoughts about what like younger females can do to really optimize for healthy, prolonged fertility, and also then towards an easier menopause, if there's something additional you haven't already mentioned.
Yeah, and this is a really important topic as well. So many more women are putting off having children to later. You know, if you look over the years, of how that sort of time to having a first child has changed, it is, you know, people are having children much later, and this is an issue because we know that fertility is really declining, say after age 30. But a lot of women are having children in the 30s, in the late 30s, even the 40s. So there's been a lot of research to look at how can we prolong fertility and actually slow down ovarian aging. Because as the ovaries age, we know that you get a decrease in the number of eggs and also the quality of the eggs as well, which means that there's a higher risk of things like miscarriage, and being unable to carry a pregnancy through. So again, you want to go back to the cells. This is all about cellular health. So there was a lot of discussion surrounding, you know, is there a way that you can actually prolong fertility by simply looking after the health of your cells? And what's known is two things. I think, first of all, that although we're looking at ovarian age and infertility, actually it's the health of your whole body that is influencing that. So if you have, you know, chronic inflammation across any part of your body, that is actually going to be influencing every cell in your body, because inflammation is something that is actually in the, you know, in the blood. It's something that is not just, you know, surrounding a single cell or influencing a particular part of the body, but it's actually something that is travels. So you can have chronic inflammation, for example, in the gut, and that's going to influence the health of the whole body. And as we know, if there's inflammation, then actually you're going to be damaging other healthy cells as well. And this is especially important, you know, when it comes to just really emphasizing the fact that you need to look after your whole body, not a specific part of it. And NAD is actually being investigated as a way to help with fertility. NAD is one of the only molecules that's been found to actually combat all of what we call are the hallmarks of aging. So these are 12 key cellular processes that seem to go wrong in our cells, driving the entire aging process. And it's been found that not only does NAD help with aging across the whole body, but actually when it comes to fertility and ovarian aging, it actually delays ovarian aging. Now, this at the moment has only been demonstrated in mice, but very successfully, to show that it not only delayed ovarian aging, but it also improved quality of the eggs and also led to more pregnancies. And I know that there are a lot of human fertility clinics now investigating this. And certainly some anecdotal evidence is that it seems to help to increase egg retrieval from IVF, and also to delay the onset of that fertility issues in women. So it's really exciting area that is certainly something that I'm following.
Yes, 100%, me too. And I see that there is a lot of things coming up in the near future that will for sure be addressing these things. Maybe also like connected to this, you touched a little bit on it, but I would be very curious to hear in general, like your opinion or maybe your vision and hope also from the future aspect, because we were talking a little bit about the long-term effects also, and how like the whole aging concept regarding menopause and how that affects. So I would love to hear your perspective on the future of especially like women's cellular health and menopause. Like, what is your hopes and visions for that?
My hope is that we get a lot more research.
Yes.
Now, I was recently at a conference and there was a statistic, and I can't remember the exact numbers, so don't quote me exactly on the numbers, but it was something like looking at where all the money for research goes into. And basically, there was more money invested into the health of our pet dogs than there was into women's health.
Oh, wow.
Now, I am all for healthy pets, love dogs, nothing against dogs, but isn't that crazy that there is less research, money, and time put into women's health than there is put into looking at dog health? That, just to put that into perspective, it's such a small amount of research, which is crazy because, specifically menopause, and women's health in terms of fertility, we know that those two things massively influence a woman's rate of aging, massively influence a woman's future health, because we now know that it's really impacting aging at the cellular level. And it really affects what is called our health span. So we've got our lifespan, which is just the number of years that we will live, but our health span is the proportion of our lifespan that will actually live in good health. And really interestingly, women are known to live longer than men, but are also known to have a shorter health span, which means that they will get more early onset age-related diseases at a lower age than a man. And again, this is thought to be very much linked to the menopause, to the hormonal changes and the impact that has on our cellular health, but also the onset of certain diseases, things like osteoporosis. If a woman's suffering from osteoporosis, then this is a knock-on effect. They are not going to be confident, if they're breaking bones, they're not going to be confident going out to the gym. That's going to impact health further and lead to many other issues. So I think it's just to get more research in this area, it is incredibly important. And that's what my hope is for the future.
Love that. And I think as we are all about human potential at Beyond Sapiens, I think also there is so much untapped potential left on the table because we haven't really addressed that. I think that's also my hope of really unleashing that potential and really embracing females to really go even more all in, because there is so much we don't yet know and so much things that are still limiting us because we don't have the research.
100%. And a lot of women actually leave their careers during the menopause because they feel like, we just can't cope anymore. We're not good enough anymore. A lot of different factors. And that is so sad. This is so sad that this is something that could be fixed and make women feel empowered, feel better about themselves, feel healthier, because they have so much left in them in their careers. I think that's really important.
100%. Yes. Oh my God. Such a great discussion. Maybe we can try to wrap this up or close it up with the summarizing question of if you could give just 3 tips for females in whatever age or phase they are at that they can actually do to optimize for their menopause.
Okay. So I know I've banged on about it loads, but it's so important, is that do not underestimate cellular health. It underpins everything, and it's much better to be preventative and maintain cellular health than it is to try and fix it afterwards. It's not impossible to fix, but it's much harder than being preventative. So, just even, years and years before perimenopause, start thinking about, or is my lifestyle inflammatory or anti-inflammatory? Look at your diet. Is it pro-inflammatory? Are you doing a lot of things that are damaging to your body? Because if you are damaging your cellular health at a young age, that means that by the time you hit perimenopause, you are going to be starting from a much worse baseline. Your cells are going to be in a much worse condition, which means that probably some of those symptoms of menopause are actually going to be worse. So trying to look after your cellular health from an early age is very important. So I think that would be number 1. I think my second thing that I always like to mention is this idea of actually trying to get to understand your own biology. So I think it's incredibly important for women to measure the hormones before they hit perimenopause, actually, to really understand what their normal levels are, because we're so often compared to what is average. And actually our estrogen levels, our progesterone levels between women can be very different. And this means that when you start to experience symptoms and you go to the doctors and they say, oh no, you're within normal limits, it's like, but am I? Like, is this normal for me? Whereas if you have a baseline of what you're normally like when you're younger, you can say, well, actually, this is really low for me. It might be normal for someone else, but compared to my normal, this is really low. And that means that you can actually say, well, I want to start doing something about it. So I think that's really important. Because then, and I guess this leads to the third point, which is that you can, act as early as possible. Prevention is better than cure. We know that, with things like HRT, people may want to think putting it off for as long as possible is the best way, but actually it's not, because by that point you're inducing cellular damage. We're having all these issues. You kind of want to keep on top of it in the first place. The same in terms of introducing lifestyle practices, supplements, acting earlier in a preventative manner is much better. Unfortunately, it's not the way that many of us have been brought up. We've been brought up with sick care, not healthcare, but we really need to change that mindset and start being much more proactive and preventative for our whole health, not just menopause.
100%. Wow, this has been super, super valuable, Nichola. I really appreciate this talk, and I'm sure our viewers will also. So I want to thank you so much for your time. And yeah.
Thank you. No, you're welcome.
I hope this video inspired and created new awareness about female health. Understanding our bodies on a deeper level is crucial for us to be in charge of our lives, health, and aging process. As said, we can only warmly recommend Nuchido Time Plus. So if you are interested, you will find all the details and the discount code in the description. Also, as you have watched this far, I know you take your health and future seriously. Hence, I would love to invite you to look into our Beyond Sapiens Accelerator program, where we provide a free exploration call to go deeper into your health and goals if you are motivated enough. So here is a link for you to apply for the free exploration. Thank you so much for watching. I hope to see you in the next video, so make sure to subscribe to our channel.